Thank you. President Trump orders National Guard troops to Los Angeles to control protests over those ICE raids.
And here to explain the impact of these raids on the San Diego community, we've invited immigration attorney Andrew Nietor to join us in studio for a conversation. Andrew, thank you so much for dropping by.
Good morning.
You know, as we get started, before we get to all these specific questions, I wanted to ask you, what do you think, what do you make overall over what you're seeing in terms of the amount of ICE raids that we're seeing really in Southern California, across the country? Have you ever seen what we're seeing today?
This is really unprecedented, both in San Diego and throughout California and across the country. It seems to be not a proportional response to any concerns that law enforcement would have. And specifically, the use of National Guard troops is extraordinary because typically the National Guard troops would be used for things like natural disasters, so earthquakes and floods. That's where you would typically see the use of National Guard troops. So if you asked me a week ago would I expect to see National Guard troops federalized and deployed on the streets of Los Angeles, I would have said that does not seem likely, but here we are.
We were talking before we got on the air about how your industry and what you're doing right now, it seems every day something is different. The rules are changing, and you have to catch up to what's going on there. Talk to me about what the National Guard, what those troops can legally do, say to the protesters when they encounter the violence that we're seeing in LA.
Certainly. So National Guard troops have this kind of strange hybrid role where they can be called up by the federal government or by the state government. Usually, again, it's usually for natural disasters with either the direct request or at least the approval of the governor. But here we had it where the president called up the national troops to engage in what appears to be law enforcement activities on U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. So that is particularly concerning. They could be involved in crowd control, but the president could, under certain circumstances, authorize National Guard troops to conduct arrests as well. And that certainly is concerning because, again, using National Guard federal troops against citizens on U.S. soil is supposed to be rare. It's been done in the past with tragic results. For instance, in the 60s, we saw it happen against civil rights protesters. And of course, in 1970, we had the Kent State massacre, where National Guard troops opened up and killed or injured over a dozen college students protesting the Vietnam War. So this is very concerning, the use of troops in this capacity.
Who are we to believe when you have the mixed messages, when the president feels the need to send in the National Guard, but then the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles are saying we have the law enforcement, we have the sheriffs, we have the police department, and they, according to the governor and the mayor, were controlling the situation when the president said, no, you're not. What do you do then?
That's really one of the extraordinary things we're seeing right now, because not only has the governor not requested the troops, he has explicitly asked the troops not be deployed.
Right.
And from what I heard this morning, he's about to file a lawsuit to force the federal government to withdraw those troops. So it's clearly uncharted territory. It implicates state sovereignty, and it is a big concern.
Yeah.
You know, here in San Diego, we recently saw the ICE raids that happened surrounding Buena Forquera, that restaurant in South Park, and we saw a lot of people from the community gather, and not to the level that we're seeing obviously in Los Angeles, but there are a lot of people who were very concerned over what was happening. Let's talk a little bit about the rights that people have as immigration and custom enforcement officers. Should they come to your home or your workplace? Can you go over some of those, what some of those rights are?
Certainly. Starting with the home, people have a heightened right to not have law enforcement enter their homes. And so everybody has the right to remain silent, and they should exercise that right. And then in order to enter a home, well, ICE would need to have a judicial warrant signed by a judge. Not an administrative warrant that ICE creates themselves, but a judicial warrant signed by a judge. And if they don't have that, you are not required to invite ICE into your home. In the workplace, it's similar. There are some differences, but I think it's important that people, whether they are business owners or employees, understand what their rights are. Again, you have the right to remain silent at all times. And in the workplace, ICE would be able to enter public areas. So for instance, in a restaurant, they might be able to go into a waiting area or the general seating area. But in order to go into private areas, they would again need that judicial warrant signed by a judge. So it's very important that business owners, employers, and employees understand their rights, exercise them. And it's also one of the reasons why sometimes you go into stores or restaurants and you see those signs, private area, do not enter. It's not just to advise the public, it's to establish this is a private area, and it establishes that law enforcement cannot cross that threshold unless a judge has signed a warrant allowing them to do that.
Based on what we've been seeing, it's just, it's curious to me that I'm even asking you this question, but are we now at a point where it's necessary to carry legal papers to prove your citizenship? Are we there in this country where they're going to ask you for your papers and you need to provide proof?
That is such a tough question, because the legal answer is no. It is not required. It has never been required that a U.S. citizen carry around proof of citizenship. Whether you are a natural-born citizen or naturalized, a citizen is a citizen, and you are not required to prove that. I, as someone born in the United States, have those rights similar to anybody who naturalized, except someday I can be president. But that's really the only difference. And so I certainly understand a lot of the fear and concerns that people have, because we also know that ICE makes mistakes. We've heard cases of ICE detaining the wrong people, detaining U.S. citizens. And DHS and ICE have acknowledged, even within the last few weeks, that they have deported people by accident. And we know that happens, so I understand the fear. It saddens me that people feel that they need to carry around proof of citizenship, and I hope we're not there, but I certainly understand why people in the community are concerned about that.
We're looking at footage right now from South Park when those raids got underway at the restaurant. What about, do you have an update by any chance on those cases? They did detain several people from Buena Forquera, the employees specifically. Do you by any chance know what's happening with those cases or with those people?
I don't have any updates on what happened to the people that were actually detained and taken away. And I think it's important to recall that there were actually several people that were detained on site as well, even if they were not taken away. And that was an infringement on their rights to be free from restraint. And so the concern is that ICE came in with this disproportionate show of force in tactical gear, detained people. They had a warrant, but it was limited, and yet they detained several people. They exercised a certain degree of aggression against members of the community using flash grenades on the streets on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. So there really is a concern in the community about that use of force. And I suppose that's where I would see a connection to what's happening in Los Angeles, because the federal government, whether it's ICE in San Diego, the National Guard troops in Los Angeles, seem to be engaging in a disproportionate response to the situation. And within the community, it's causing fear and intimidation. To me, the question is whether that's intentional or not.
I was going to ask you, because that is an escalation, and it's the optics of it. The question is that intentional? Is that the point?
It certainly seems to be, because when you look at what they claim to want to do, that's not what they're doing. And that's why Governor and the mayor have said, please don't bring in the troops. That's only going to heighten tensions. And that seems to be what we're seeing this very morning.
This is far from over. We'll be speaking with you again, I'm sure. Andrew Nietor, immigration attorney. We thank you for your time and the expertise.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll be back.